Mrs. Helen Bradshaw adjusts her wire-rimmed glasses as she surveys her AP English Literature classroom at Riverside High School. 28 years of teaching have given her unwavering confidence in her ability to identify which students belong in advanced coursework. Her gaze settles on Amara Okafor, who sits quietly in the third row, taking notes in what appears to be broken, fragmented English. Miss Okafor, Bradshaw's voice cuts through the afternoon discussion about global literature with surgical precision. Would you care to share your thoughts on the symbolism in Achebe's Things Fall Apart? Though I suspect the language barriers might make that challenging for you. Amara looks up from her notebook, where she's been writing analysis in perfectly structured academic prose. Her deliberate code switching to casual speech around peers has created the false impression of limited English proficiency. It's about, when things get messed up and stuff. Bradshaw's thin smile carries decades of academic superiority. Perhaps we should stick to more accessible texts for students still developing their English skills. Her patronizing tone makes several classmates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler Rodriguez instinctively reaches for his phone, sensing something wrong about his teacher's assumptions. Maya Patel, Amara's study partner, knows exactly how brilliant her friend actually is. The stage is set for a revelation that will shatter every assumption about intelligence, language, and academic capability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Riverside High School stands as a monument to educational excellence in Portland, Oregon's affluent East Side district, where towering Douglas firs frame brick buildings that house some of the state's most competitive academic programs. The school's manicured campus reflects the community's investment in education, with state-of-the-art science labs, a performing arts center, and a library stocked with literature from around the world. Advanced placement courses attract ambitious students whose college aspirations demand rigorous preparation. Mrs. Helen Bradshaw's AP English Literature classroom occupies a corner of the humanities wing, its walls lined with classic American and British authors whose portraits survey rows of eager faces. Bradshaw has cultivated this space as her academic kingdom, where 28 years of teaching have established her reputation as a demanding educator who separates serious scholars from casual students. Her methods emphasize traditional literary analysis and formal academic discourse that she believes distinguishes educated minds from those lacking proper intellectual foundation. The afternoon sun filters through tall windows as 16 students engage in discussion about post-colonial literature, a unit that Bradshaw approaches with reluctant compliance to state curriculum requirements. Her comfort zone resides firmly within European and American classics, and contemporary global voices often feel foreign to her pedagogical instincts. She views works by authors like Chinua Achebe as necessary diversions, rather than essential contributions to literary understanding. Amara Okafor occupies seat 3C with the deliberate invisibility that teenage survival instincts develop when navigating environments where difference attracts unwanted attention. Her notebook contains analysis written in crisp academic prose that would impress graduate school professors, but her verbal contributions deliberately mirror the casual speech patterns of her peers. Years of moving between countries taught her that code switching protects her from assumptions about intelligence based on accent, appearance, or cultural background. The demographic composition of Riverside reflects Portland's complex relationship with diversity, predominantly white, with pockets of students whose families represent the city's growing international community. Amara's presence in AP literature represents both progress and tension, as her academic excellence challenges assumptions about who belongs in advanced coursework, while her careful speech adaptation reveals awareness of how language can become a weapon against academic credibility. Bradshaw's teaching philosophy emerged during an era when educational standards emphasized assimilation over cultural appreciation. Her training stressed grammatical correctness and formal discourse as markers of intellectual capability, creating blind spots about linguistic diversity that enriches rather than diminishes academic environments. Her bias manifests through subtle corrections, patronizing explanations, and lowered expectations that masquerade as supportive accommodation. The classroom dynamics reflect broader social tensions about educational equity and cultural representation. Students like Tyler Rodriguez understand how phones can document injustice, while Maya Patel witnesses daily the gap between her friends' true capabilities and teacher assumptions. Alex Chen's student government experience provides awareness of how institutional bias affects academic opportunities. And Jordan Washington's younger perspective offers fresh insight into educational fairness. Principal Janet Morrison manages a school caught between excellence aspirations and equity obligations, where parent pressure for high achievement sometimes conflicts with inclusive education values. Her administrative challenges include balancing teacher autonomy with student protection while maintaining academic standards that satisfy college admissions requirements and community expectations. The broader Portland educational landscape reflects national conversations about culturally responsive teaching and linguistic diversity in academic settings. Riverside High's reputation depends on advanced placement success, rates and college admissions statistics that can inadvertently pressure teachers to maintain traditional approaches rather than embrace pedagogical innovation that recognizes multiple forms of intelligence and expression. Dr. Amara Okafor's position as linguistics professor at Portland State University provides academic credibility that challenges assumptions about her daughter's capabilities, while Ambassador Kwame Okafor's diplomatic status represents international perspective that enriches rather than threatens American educational values. Their family's multilingual environment creates cognitive advantages that traditional assessment methods often fail to recognize. The timing of this confrontation reflects educational tensions between traditional academic standards and contemporary understanding of linguistic diversity as intellectual asset rather than academic liability. Bradshaw's classroom represents institutional resistance to change, while Amara's presence symbolizes evolution toward more inclusive definitions of academic excellence. The stage is set for collision between outdated assumptions about intelligence and modern reality of global communication skills that represent preparation for international careers rather than academic deficiency. The afternoon discussion about post-colonial literature creates ironic backdrop for exploring how language and culture intersect with power and privilege in educational environments that claim to value diversity while practicing subtle discrimination. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amara Okafor carries within her 16-year-old frame the linguistic inheritance of a childhood spent navigating continents, cultures, and conversations that would challenge most adults' intellectual flexibility. Born in Lagos, Nigeria, she absorbed Yoruba from her grandmother's lullabies before English became her academic language, and Igbo connected her to her father's ancestral traditions. Her family's diplomatic postings transformed her into a living library of human communication. Her father, Ambassador Kwame Okafor, represents Nigeria at the United Nations, where his fluency in French, English, Arabic, and Portuguese facilitates international negotiations that shape global policy. Her mother, Dr. Chioma Okafor, teaches linguistics at Portland State University, where her research on multilingual cognitive development has earned international recognition. Their dinner conversations flow seamlessly between languages as naturally as rivers merge into oceans. Amara's linguistic journey began in earnest during her family's posting to Geneva, where Swiss German, French, and Italian became playground languages that she absorbed through interaction with diplomatic children whose parents represented dozens of nations. Her enrollment at the International School of Geneva exposed her to Mandarin through Chinese classmates, Russian through Eastern European friends, and Spanish through Latin American diplomatic families. The family's subsequent assignment to Buenos Aires deepened her Spanish fluency while introducing Portuguese through Brazilian diplomatic circles. Her teenage years in Argentina included intensive language study that achieved native-level proficiency in Spanish while maintaining active use of her African languages through family connections and cultural events that preserved her Nigerian identity despite geographic distance. Portland represents the family's first extended posting in the United States, where Amara encounters American educational expectations that often mistake linguistic adaptation for intellectual limitation. Her deliberate code switching to casual English reflects survival instincts, developed through observing how accent and formal speech patterns can trigger assumptions about academic capability and social belonging. Her linguistic repertoire extends beyond mere vocabulary to include cultural nuances that transform communication into art form. She understands that Yoruba storytelling traditions differ from Germanic precision, that Arabic poetry follows rhythmic patterns foreign to English verse, and that Chinese tonal variations carry meaning that alphabetic languages cannot replicate. Her multilingual mind processes literature through cultural lenses that reveal layers of meaning invisible to monolingual readers. Academically, Amara's performance exceeds grade-level expectations across all subjects, but she's learned to moderate her contributions to avoid standing out in ways that invite scrutiny or resentment. Her essays demonstrate sophisticated analysis written in flawless academic prose, but her verbal participation deliberately mirrors peer speech patterns that signal social belonging rather than intellectual superiority. Her notebooks contain notes written in multiple languages, with literary analysis flowing between English academic discourse, French critical theory terminology, and German philosophical concepts that enhance rather than complicate her understanding. Her mind organizes information through linguistic networks that create cognitive advantages in pattern recognition, cultural analysis, and critical thinking skills. The social dynamics of American high school present unique challenges for someone whose background defies easy categorization. Her Nigerian heritage connects her to African American student communities, while her diplomatic upbringing creates cultural distance from urban African American experiences. Her linguistic abilities could earn academic recognition while potentially triggering social isolation from peers who might view her capabilities as threatening or pretentious. Amara's relationship with Maya Patel reflects friendship based on intellectual compatibility and shared experience navigating cultural assumptions in academic environments. Maya's Indian American background provides parallel understanding of how ethnicity can influence teacher expectations, while her own linguistic capabilities create mutual appreciation for cultural complexity that enriches rather than complicates identity. Her family's evening discussions often focus on educational experiences that reveal institutional biases disguised as academic standards. Dr. Okafor's linguistic research provides theoretical framework for understanding how language prejudice operates in educational settings, while Ambassador Okafor's diplomatic experience offers strategies for addressing discrimination through patient education rather than confrontational resistance. Amara approaches each school day with strategic awareness of how to balance authentic self-expression with social survival instincts that protect her from assumptions about intelligence, capability, and belonging. Her linguistic gifts represent preparation for global careers in diplomacy, international business, or academic research, but American educational systems often fail to recognize multilingual abilities as intellectual assets rather than academic. Complications, the irony of her situation, and cuts deep. A student whose linguistic capabilities exceed most adults' lifetime achievements faces teacher assumptions about intellectual limitation based on deliberate speech. Adaptation designed to facilitate social acceptance. Her true abilities remain hidden beneath careful performance of academic mediocrity that protects her from attention while denying recognition of extraordinary capabilities. Today's class discussion about post-colonial literature creates perfect opportunity for Amara to demonstrate understanding that transcends typical high school analysis. But her social survival instincts conflict with intellectual honesty about her capabilities and cultural knowledge that could illuminate text meanings invisible to monolingual perspectives. Mrs. Helen Bradshaw represents 28 years of educational evolution that stopped somewhere in the 1990s, when diversity meant including one Langston Hughes poem in February, and cultural sensitivity extended to pronouncing foreign names slowly and loudly. At 52, her teaching methods reflect an era when academic excellence was measured by conformity to white, middle-class communication standards that dismissed linguistic diversity as academic deficiency requiring remediation rather than recognition. Her corner classroom serves as shrine to traditional literary canon, where Shakespeare and Dickens preside over discussions that rarely venture beyond European and American perspectives. The recent mandate to include global literature in AP curriculum feels like administrative interference with proven pedagogical methods that produce decades of high test scores and college admission success for students who mastered conventional academic discourse. Bradshaw's educational philosophy emerged during teacher training that emphasized deficit models of linguistic difference, where non-standard English represented academic weakness rather than cultural richness. Her master's degree from a regional university included coursework that treated multilingualism as educational challenge rather than cognitive advantage, creating blind spots about linguistic diversity that persist despite decades of research proving her assumptions wrong. Her classroom management style relies on intellectual intimidation disguised as academic rigor, where students learn to demonstrate knowledge through performance of cultural codes that signal belonging in academic environments. Her praise flows to students whose speech patterns mirror her own background, while her skepticism targets those whose linguistic adaptations suggest foreign influence or non-academic origins. The demographics of Riverside High challenge Bradshaw's comfort zone as increasing numbers of international students, refugee families, and diplomatic children bring linguistic diversity that her training never prepared her to appreciate. Her response involves lowered expectations disguised as supportive accommodation, where she assigns simpler texts to students whose accents suggest intellectual limitations that exist only in her prejudiced assumptions. Her position as department head grants authority over curriculum decisions and teacher mentoring that spreads her biases throughout the English program. Younger teachers learn through observation that certain students require different academic standards, that linguistic diversity complicates rather than enriches classroom discussions, and that maintaining high test scores sometimes means accepting intellectual segregation based on cultural background. Bradshaw's personal background includes small-town, Oregon upbringing, where diversity meant Protestant versus Catholic rather than global linguistic traditions. Her college education occurred during an era when multicultural education meant adding token authors to reading lists, rather than fundamentally reconsidering how intelligence manifests across cultural contexts. Her worldview crystallized before research demonstrated cognitive advantages of multilingual development. Her teaching evaluation scores reflect administrative appreciation for classroom control and test preparation effectiveness rather than cultural responsiveness or inclusive pedagogical practices. Parents praise her high standards, while students of color often request transfers to other sections, creating demographic patterns that administrators notice but rarely address through professional development or accountability measures. The irony of her position teaching post-colonial literature reveals institutional contradictions where curriculum inclusion occurs without corresponding teacher preparation or attitude adjustment. She approaches authors like Achebe as anthropological curiosities rather than literary equals, treating their works as windows into exotic cultures rather than sophisticated, artistic achievements worthy of serious academic analysis. Bradshaw's interactions with colleagues reveal subtle bias patterns where she questions academic placement recommendations for minority students while assuming intellectual capability for white students with similar qualifications. Her mentoring advice often includes suggestions about speech therapy or additional English support for students whose linguistic backgrounds she perceives as academic liabilities. Her relationship with administration reflects mutual convenience, where her high test scores justify overlooking student complaints about classroom climate or cultural insensitivity. Principal Morrison's emphasis on measurable outcomes creates protection for teachers whose methods produce statistical success regardless of inclusive education. Values that official policies promote. The broader educational context enables Bradshaw's bias through systems that reward conformity to traditional academic standards while failing to recognize alternative forms of intellectual expression. Her classroom represents institutional resistance to educational evolution that embraces linguistic diversity as cognitive asset rather than academic obstacle requiring correction or accommodation. Her position grants power over student futures through recommendation letters, grade assignments, and college application support that can determine academic opportunities. Students learn to navigate her expectations through performance of cultural codes that signal academic worthiness while suppressing authentic intellectual capabilities that don't conform to her narrow definitions of academic excellence. Today's discussion about Things Fall Apart creates perfect storm where Bradshaw's cultural assumptions about African literature intersect with her linguistic biases about student capability. Her expectation that Amara lacks intellectual sophistication to appreciate Achebe's complexity reflects prejudices about both cultural background and language proficiency that will soon encounter devastating contradiction. Her confidence in identifying academic capability through surface-level language assessment represents decades of unchallenged authority over student categorization. The revelation awaiting her will shatter assumptions about intelligence, culture, and linguistic diversity that have guided her teaching career, while revealing how intellectual prejudice masquerades as educational standards. The afternoon discussion gains momentum as Bradshaw distributes handouts about post-colonial literary themes, her movements deliberately avoiding eye contact with Amara while focusing attention on students whose participation she considers academically worthwhile. Her body language signals dismissal through subtle positioning that creates inclusion and exclusion patterns visible to observant students who understand classroom social dynamics. Let's examine Achebe's use of proverbs in Igbo culture. Bradshaw announces while glancing toward Maya Patel and Alex Chen, students whose previous contributions met her approval. These linguistic devices represent cultural wisdom traditions that require sophisticated analysis to understand their literary function within the narrative structure. Tyler Rodriguez activates his phone's recording feature with movements practiced through months of documenting questionable teacher behavior for his journalism project about educational equity. His finger hovers over the livestream button as he recognizes developing patterns that transform routine class discussion into potential social justice documentation. Amara continues taking notes in what appears to casual observation as fragmented. English, but actually represents sophisticated literary analysis written in academic prose that would impress graduate school professors. Her deliberate code-switching strategy protects her from unwanted attention, while enabling intellectual engagement that satisfies her analytical curiosity. Miss Okafor, Bradshaw's voice carries barely concealed impatience as she reluctantly acknowledges Amara's raised hand. Do you have something to contribute about proverb usage? Though I realize the cultural context might be challenging for someone still developing English proficiency. The classroom atmosphere shifts as several students recognize the inappropriate assumption underlying their teacher's question. Jordan Washington, despite being younger, understands through personal experience how educators can disguise prejudice as academic concern while maintaining plausible deniability about discriminatory treatment. Well, like the proverbs and stuff. They're kinda important, Amara responds with carefully modulated casual speech that conceals her sophisticated understanding of Igbo linguistic traditions while conforming to peer communication patterns that protect her social position within the classroom hierarchy. Bradshaw's thin smile reveals satisfaction at confirmation of her assumptions about Amara's intellectual limitations. Perhaps you could elaborate on why they're kinda important. Academic discussion requires more precise language than casual conversation. This is advanced placement literature, not social media communication. Ms. Sofia Reyes, teaching Spanish in the adjacent classroom, pauses her lesson as Bradshaw's raised voice penetrates the shared wall. Her multilingual background provides sensitivity to linguistic discrimination that her colleague demonstrates through patronizing corrections of perfectly adequate student responses that reveal cultural bias rather than academic standards. Maya Patel's internal conflict intensifies as she witnesses her friend's intellectual capabilities being dismissed through teacher assumptions that mistake deliberate code switching for academic deficiency. Her study sessions with Amara revealed analytical abilities that exceed most graduate students' critical thinking skills, making the current classroom dynamic particularly frustrating. I mean, like, they show how the culture thinks about things. Amara continues her performance of academic mediocrity while internally composing sophisticated analysis about how Achebe's proverb integration demonstrates resistance to colonial linguistic imperialism through preservation of indigenous wisdom, traditions, embedded within English narrative structure. Alex Chen recognizes developing injustice through his student government experience, addressing discrimination complaints that often involve teacher assumptions about student capabilities based on demographic characteristics rather than actual academic performance. His position provides awareness of how subtle bias creates hostile educational environments. Bradshaw approaches Amara's desk with movements that signal pedagogical superiority disguised as supportive intervention. Let me help you understand the complexity here. Achebe's proverb usage represents sophisticated literary technique that requires advanced analytical skills. Perhaps we should focus on more accessible aspects of the text. The condescension reaches levels that make several students uncomfortable as they witness educational interaction that violates basic principles of respect and dignity while masquerading as academic support. Dr. Kim, passing in the hallway, notices classroom tension through body language visible through open doorway. Maybe someone else can demonstrate proper analytical discourse about proverb function in post-colonial literature, Bradshaw announces, while scanning faces for students whose contributions she considers academically worthwhile. Her implication that Amara lacks intellectual capacity creates hostile environment that violates educational equity principles. Tyler's livestream notifications begin pinging as viewers recognize developing educational discrimination caught on camera. His journalism project about institutional bias gains real-time documentation that exposes how linguistic prejudice operates in academic settings through teacher assumptions that deny student capabilities. The escalation continues as Bradshaw's authority complex drives her to demonstrate intellectual superiority over a student whose actual capabilities threaten her assumptions about academic hierarchy based on cultural background and speech patterns. Her need to maintain classroom control conflicts with growing student awareness that discrimination is occurring. Jordan Washington's hand trembles as he considers challenging teacher behavior that violates everything his parents taught him about educational fairness. His younger perspective provides clarity about injustice that older students might rationalize through institutional loyalty or academic survival instincts. Principal Morrison receives text notification from concerned parent monitoring Tyler's live stream about classroom incident requiring administrative intervention. Her office phone begins ringing as social media amplifies footage that threatens school reputation through documentation of teacher bias disguised as academic standards. The tension builds toward breaking point as Bradshaw's linguistic prejudice collides with Amara's hidden intellectual capabilities, while multiple recording devices document educational discrimination that will soon encounter devastating contradiction through revelation of extraordinary abilities concealed beneath careful performance of academic conformity. Bradshaw's frustration with Amara's limited contributions escalates into public humiliation designed to establish classroom hierarchy through intellectual intimidation. Her 28 years of unchallenged authority create confidence that student compliance can be achieved through academic shaming, disguised as educational intervention designed to motivate improved performance. Class, let me demonstrate the difference between casual commentary and sophisticated literary analysis, Bradshaw announces, while positioning herself directly beside Amara's desk in a power stance that signals pedagogical dominance. Miss Okafor's responses illustrate why English language learners sometimes struggle with advanced placement coursework despite good intentions. The mischaracterization cuts through classroom air like academic knife, reducing Amara to a stereotype that ignores her actual linguistic capabilities, while creating false narrative about intellectual limitation that serves Bradshaw's need to maintain authority over student categorization and classroom dynamics. Tyler's live stream explodes with viewer comments as audience members recognize blatant discrimination occurring in real time. His phone screen fills with notifications from education advocates, civil rights organizations, and academic professionals who understand how linguistic bias operates in educational settings through teacher assumptions. Perhaps Miss Okafor would benefit from transferring to regular English, where the pace might be more appropriate for her current skill level. Bradshaw continues her public assault on Amara's academic dignity while maintaining plausible deniability about discriminatory motivation behind her suggestion for course reassignment. Maya Patel's face flushes with anger as she watches her brilliant friend endure intellectual humiliation based on teacher assumptions that mistake deliberate code switching for academic deficiency. Her internal struggle between loyalty and self-preservation reaches breaking point as injustice becomes unbearable to witness passively. Ms. Reyes abandons her Spanish lesson to investigate disturbance that penetrates shared classroom wall. Her multilingual expertise provides immediate recognition of linguistic discrimination occurring through colleague behavior that violates professional ethics and educational equity principles that should guide student interactions. I think maybe I should just listen instead of talking, Amara responds, with carefully modulated deference that conceals volcanic intellectual capabilities beneath surface compliance designed to de-escalate confrontation while protecting her social position within hostile academic environment. Bradshaw interprets Amara's diplomatic response as confirmation of intellectual inadequacy rather than strategic conflict avoidance. That's probably wise. Advanced literary discussion requires precision and sophistication that develops through years of academic preparation that not all students have received. The implicit racism becomes explicit as Bradshaw's statement suggests cultural deficiency rather than individual assessment, creating hostile environment that violates federal guidelines about equal educational opportunities regardless of linguistic background or ethnic heritage that should be celebrated rather than remediated. Alex Chen's student government training provides framework for recognizing institutional discrimination that requires administrative intervention. His documentation includes note-taking that captures specific language patterns, demonstrating bias, while building evidence file that could support formal complaints requiring official response. Jordan Washington's younger perspective provides clarity about injustice that academic socialization might obscure. His experience with educational fairness creates moral outrage that transcends social hierarchy considerations, enabling courage that older students might suppress through institutional loyalty or survival instincts. You know what, Miss Okafor? Bradshaw's voice drips with patronizing authority as she prepares devastating final assault on Amara's academic dignity. Why don't you read this passage aloud so the class can hear how pronunciation difficulties affect comprehension? It might help everyone understand why some students need additional support. The request transforms classroom discussion into public humiliation, designed to demonstrate intellectual hierarchy through linguistic performance that will supposedly reveal academic limitations, justifying differential treatment and lowered expectations that serve teacher bias rather than student welfare. Dr. Kim appears in the doorway as his ESL coordinator responsibilities include monitoring situations where language becomes weapon against student dignity. His professional expertise immediately recognizes discrimination disguised as academic intervention, while his presence adds administrative witness to developing crisis. Principal Morrison receives multiple phone calls from parents monitoring Tyler's live stream as social media amplifies footage that threatens school reputation through real-time documentation of teacher behavior that violates district policies about inclusive education and cultural responsiveness. The breaking point arrives as Bradshaw's linguistic prejudice reaches crescendo through public humiliation designed to confirm her assumptions about student capabilities, while demonstrating classroom authority that will soon encounter devastating contradiction through revelation of intellectual abilities that exceed her wildest academic nightmares. Amara's moment of decision approaches as she calculates whether continued code-switching performance can protect her social position, or whether intellectual honesty requires abandoning survival strategy that conceals extraordinary capabilities threatening to explode through careful disguise. The classroom holds collective breath as students sense approaching revelation that will transform routine humiliation into spectacular demonstration of how assumptions about intelligence can be shattered through truth that exposes prejudice, masquerading as pedagogical concern for academic standards. Multiple recording devices capture approaching climax where linguistic bias collides with multilingual brilliance, while witnesses prepare to document transformation of victim into intellectual force that will humble authority through demonstration of capabilities that render teacher assumptions absurd rather than academic. Amara slowly closes her notebook and rises from her seat with dignity that transforms her from targeted student into commanding presence. Her posture straightens as she abandons the protective slouch that concealed her confidence, revealing bearing that reflects diplomatic training and international education that prepared her for exactly this moment of truth. "You know what, Mrs. Bradshaw?" Amara's voice shifts from casual peer speech to crisp academic prose that immediately captures classroom attention. "I believe I can provide the sophisticated literary analysis you're requesting about Achebe's use of Igbo proverbs in post-colonial narrative structure. The transformation is immediate and stunning. Her diction becomes precise, her vocabulary expands exponentially, and her analytical framework demonstrates graduate-level understanding that leaves classroom occupants speechless with recognition of intellectual capabilities that teacher assumptions completely failed to recognize. Achebe's integration of Igbo proverbs serves multiple narrative functions," Amara continues, in flawless academic English that reveals years of international education. First, they preserve indigenous wisdom traditions that colonial education attempted to erase. Second, they demonstrate linguistic resistance to imperial cultural dominance. Third, they provide authenticity that Western readers often miss. Tyler's livestream viewership explodes as audience members witness dramatic reversal where presumed academic limitation transforms into intellectual dominance. Comments flood his screen faster than he can read them as viewers share footage across social platforms that amplify impact beyond classroom boundaries. But Amara isn't finished with her demonstration. "Perhaps you'd prefer my analysis in the original Igbo language," she continues, seamlessly transitioning into fluent Igbo that flows like musical poetry while maintaining analytical precision that demonstrates complete cultural and linguistic mastery of Achebe's artistic techniques. Bradshaw's face drains of color as she processes implications of student capabilities that exceed her own linguistic knowledge, while revealing assumptions about intelligence that reduce her academic authority to embarrassing display of cultural ignorance disguised as pedagogical expertise. Or maybe French literary criticism would be more appropriate. Amara transitions effortlessly into sophisticated French discourse about post-colonial theory that demonstrates familiarity with critical frameworks that graduate programs typically require while maintaining analytical depth that surpasses undergraduate expectations. Maya Patel smiles with profound satisfaction as her friend's true capabilities emerge from hiding while classmates recognize intellectual abilities that exceed most adult academic preparation. The revelation validates her knowledge about Amara's extraordinary gifts while exposing teacher prejudice that created hostile environment. "We could examine this through German philosophical frameworks," Amara continues in perfect German, that incorporates Hegelian dialectical analysis with post-colonial theory synthesis that would impress university professors while demonstrating cultural competence that spans continents and academic traditions. Ms. Reyes steps fully into the classroom as her multilingual expertise confirms Amara's linguistic mastery across multiple language families. Her Spanish teaching credentials provide authority to assess language proficiency that clearly exceeds native speaker capabilities in several linguistic traditions. Or perhaps Arabic literary analysis would illuminate additional perspectives. Amara transitions into flowing Arabic that incorporates classical poetic traditions with contemporary critical theory while maintaining academic rigor that demonstrates intellectual preparation that surpasses typical high school education. Alex Chen documents the revelation with academic precision that will support administrative review of teacher behavior that violated educational equity principles through assumptions based on prejudice rather than actual student assessment or capability recognition. The linguistic demonstration continues as Amara effortlessly transitions between Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, Russian, and Spanish, while maintaining sophisticated literary analysis that reveals cognitive advantages of multilingual development that research consistently validates, but educational practice often fails to recognize. Jordan Washington watches with amazement as his peer demonstrates intellectual abilities that humble adult assumptions while proving how surface-level language assessment can mask extraordinary capabilities that deserve recognition rather than remediation or dismissive treatment. Dr. Kim enters the classroom as ESL coordinator, whose expertise immediately recognizes linguistic mastery that represents cognitive advantage rather than academic deficiency. His professional assessment confirms that Amara's abilities exceed most educators' linguistic capabilities while revealing teacher bias that violated professional standards. "I speak 12 languages fluently," Amara concludes, in perfect English that carries diplomatic authority inherited from her ambassador father and academic precision learned from her linguistics professor mother. "I chose to code switch to casual speech because I wanted to fit in with my peers, not because I lack intellectual capability." The silence following her demonstration is deafening as classroom occupants process revelation that transforms everything about academic hierarchy, teacher authority, and student capability assessment while exposing prejudice that masqueraded as educational standard. Principal Morrison appears in the doorway as administrative crisis management requirements demand immediate response to situation that threatens school reputation through social media documentation of teacher discrimination against student whose capabilities exceed institutional expectations. Bradshaw stands speechless as 28 years of assumptions about intelligence crumble under demonstration of linguistic mastery that reveals her own limitations while exposing biases that reduced extraordinary student to stereotype based on appearance and deliberate speech adaptation. The power dynamic reverses completely as student demonstrates intellectual superiority, while teacher faces recognition that her academic authority cannot survive exposure of prejudices that violated professional ethics and educational equity, principles that should guide student interactions regardless of demographic characteristics. The classroom erupts in spontaneous applause as students recognize the extraordinary demonstration of intellectual capability they've just witnessed. Tyler's livestream viewership reaches thousands as viewers share footage of linguistic mastery that exposes educational discrimination while celebrating student triumph over institutional prejudice. Bradshaw attempts damage control through apologetic rhetoric that cannot undo public humiliation she created for herself through prejudiced assumptions. I had no idea about your linguistic background. Perhaps I made some incorrect assessments about your capabilities based on incomplete information. Maya Patel stands and begins slow clap that builds throughout classroom as peers recognize justice being served through intellectual demonstration that humbles authority while validating student dignity. Her friendship with Amara provides satisfaction at witnessing truth triumph over prejudice through spectacular revelation. Ms. Reyes approaches with professional admiration for linguistic mastery that exceeds most educators' capabilities. "Amara, your multilingual analysis was absolutely brilliant. You demonstrated graduate-level understanding across multiple cultural and linguistic frameworks. I'm genuinely impressed by your intellectual sophistication." Principal Morrison enters with administrative urgency as social media notifications alert her to viral footage documenting teacher discrimination in her school. Her crisis management training recognizes immediate need for damage control while ensuring student welfare through appropriate intervention and teacher accountability. "Mrs. Bradshaw, "I need to see you in my office immediately," Morrison announces with administrative authority that signals serious consequences for behavior that violates district policies about inclusive education and cultural responsiveness. Her tone indicates disciplinary action rather than casual consultation. Dr. Kim approaches Amara with ESL coordinator expertise that recognizes linguistic gifts as cognitive advantages rather than academic complications. "Your demonstration was remarkable. Your multilingual capabilities represent exactly the kind of global competence that our education system should celebrate rather than diminish through prejudiced assumptions." Alex Chen documents incident details that will support formal discrimination complaint requiring administrative response. His student government experience provides framework for understanding how teacher behavior violated educational equity principles while creating hostile environment based on cultural bias rather than academic assessment. Tyler's phone buzzes constantly with social media notifications as footage reaches viral status across multiple platforms. Education advocates, civil rights organizations, and academic professionals share content that exposes institutional bias while celebrating student intellectual triumph over discrimination. Jordan Washington feels empowered by witnessing peer courage that challenged authority through truth-telling. His younger perspective provides clarity about injustice, while demonstrating how student voice can create accountability when institutional systems fail to protect dignity and equal treatment. Bradshaw faces immediate administrative consequences as Morrison's office investigation begins with review of complaint history and classroom observation reports that may reveal pattern of discriminatory behavior. Her position as department head provides no protection against civil rights violations documented through multiple recording devices. The viral footage triggers broader conversations about linguistic discrimination in educational settings as viewers share personal experiences with teacher assumptions that reduced multilingual capabilities to academic deficiencies, requiring remediation rather than recognition as intellectual assets. Amara maintains diplomatic composure despite personal satisfaction at exposing prejudice through intellectual demonstration. Her ambassador father's training in conflict resolution provides framework for transforming confrontation into educational opportunity rather than pursuing punitive measures against teacher whose bias created hostile environment. Parent phone calls flood Morrison's office as community members express outrage about teacher behavior while praising Amara's dignity and intellectual demonstration. The contrast between student grace and teacher prejudice creates public relations crisis requiring immediate administrative response. Ms. Reyes offers mentorship opportunities that recognize Amara's linguistic gifts as preparation for international career, rather than academic complication requiring accommodation. Her multilingual teaching expertise provides perspective about how educational systems can celebrate rather than diminish cultural and linguistic diversity. Dr. Amara Okafor receives notification about classroom incident involving her daughter as social media footage reaches Portland State University colleagues who recognize implications of linguistic discrimination. Her academic expertise provides framework for understanding how bias operates in educational settings. Ambassador Kwame Okafor's diplomatic training prepares him for addressing institutional discrimination through appropriate channels while protecting his daughter's educational experience. His United Nations experience provides perspective about how prejudice affects student welfare through teacher assumptions about capabilities. The immediate aftermath transforms classroom discussion into teachable moment about linguistic diversity, cultural competence, and educational equity that will influence student understanding about bias, privilege, and academic justice for years beyond their high school experience. Bradshaw's career faces serious jeopardy as viral footage documents discriminatory behavior that violates professional ethics, while exposing institutional failures that enabled prejudiced treatment to continue unchallenged until student courage created accountability through truth demonstration. The incident becomes case study about how assumptions about intelligence can mask extraordinary capabilities, while revealing how multilingual abilities represent cognitive advantages that educational systems should celebrate rather than remediate. Through cultural bias disguised as academic standards, the district investigation moves with unprecedented speed as viral footage creates public pressure for accountability while exposing systematic problems in cultural competence training and bias prevention. Superintendent Dr. Rachel Martinez arrives within hours to assess crisis management requirements and ensure appropriate response to documented discrimination. Bradshaw faces immediate suspension without pay, pending formal investigation of discriminatory behavior that violated federal civil rights protections and district policies about inclusive education. Her 28-year tenure provides no protection against documented evidence of linguistic bias that created hostile educational environment. The Oregon Department of Education launches formal inquiry into district compliance with multicultural education requirements and teacher preparation standards. Federal investigators examine whether systematic patterns of discrimination warrant civil rights enforcement action requiring comprehensive institutional reform. Tyler's documentation becomes evidence in formal discrimination complaint, while his journalism project about educational equity receives state recognition for exposing institutional bias through citizen journalism. His footage influences policy discussions about student voice and digital accountability in educational settings. Dr. Amara Okafor's linguistics expertise provides expert testimony about multilingual cognitive advantages and educational discrimination that supports formal complaints while informing professional development requirements for district faculty. Her academic credentials add scholarly authority to civil rights investigation. Ambassador Kwame Okafor's diplomatic status ensures international attention to educational discrimination case, while his United Nations connections provide broader context about linguistic rights and cultural competence in democratic institutions. His involvement elevates local incident to national conversation. Maya Patel receives recognition for friendship loyalty that supported peer through discriminatory treatment, while her witness testimony provides crucial evidence about systematic bias patterns. Her advocacy demonstrates how student solidarity can create accountability when institutional systems fail. Mens Reyes becomes interim department head as district implements comprehensive review of English curriculum and teaching practices. Her multilingual expertise guides development of cultural competence standards that celebrate linguistic diversity as intellectual asset rather than academic deficit. Principal Morrison implements emergency professional development, focusing on implicit bias, cultural responsiveness, and linguistic diversity appreciation. Her administrative response includes policy changes that protect multilingual students while ensuring teacher accountability for discriminatory behavior. Alex Chen's student government advocacy results in formal bias reporting system that protects student voice while creating accountability mechanisms for addressing discrimination complaints. His leadership demonstrates how student agency can influence institutional change through organized advocacy. Jordan Washington's witness testimony contributes to age-appropriate discussions about educational equity and civil rights protection in academic settings. His younger perspective provides clarity about injustice while inspiring peer advocacy for inclusive educational environments. Dr. Kim's ESL coordinator expertise informs district-wide training about multilingual student support that recognizes linguistic capabilities as cognitive advantages requiring celebration rather than remediation. His professional development programs influence teacher preparation. Throughout the region, the viral footage reaches international audiences as education advocates worldwide share documentation of linguistic discrimination and student triumph. Academic conferences feature Amara's case study as example of multilingual intelligence that traditional assessment methods often fail to recognize. Bradshaw's termination becomes final after investigation confirms pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning multiple years and affecting numerous students. Her dismissal sends clear message about accountability for bias that violates professional ethics and student welfare. The incident influences state legislation requiring cultural competence certification for all educators while establishing bias reporting systems that protect student voice and ensure administrative accountability. Amara's case becomes catalyst for educational reform that recognizes multilingual abilities as cognitive assets rather than academic deficits. Federal civil rights investigators determine that Riverside High's failure to address discriminatory patterns constituted systematic violation of equal educational opportunities. The settlement requires comprehensive training, policy revision, and monitoring systems that protect linguistic diversity while ensuring teacher accountability. 3 months later, Bradshaw's teaching license faces permanent revocation. A state education board determines that discriminatory behavior violated professional ethics standards. Her attempt to appeal fails when additional students provide testimony about similar treatment that reveals patterns spanning multiple academic years. 2 years after the classroom confrontation, Riverside High School transforms from institution tolerating linguistic bias into national model for multicultural education excellence. The Okafor Protocols, named after Amara's dignified response to discrimination, become mandatory training for educators nationwide who learn to recognize multilingual abilities as intellectual advantages rather than academic obstacles. Amara graduates as valedictorian with full scholarship to Harvard University, where her linguistic capabilities earn recognition from international relations professors preparing future diplomats. Her graduation speech, delivered in 6 languages, becomes viral inspiration for multilingual students worldwide who face similar educational discrimination based on prejudiced assumptions about intelligence. The incident influences congressional hearings about linguistic discrimination in public education, where Amara provides expert testimony about how bias affects student achievement. Her advocacy contributes to federal legislation requiring cultural competence training and bias prevention programs in all schools receiving federal funding. Dr. Amara Okafor's research about multilingual cognitive advantages gains international attention following her daughter's case, leading to paradigm shift in educational psychology that recognizes linguistic diversity as neurological asset. Her academic work influences teacher preparation programs that celebrate rather than remediate cultural differences. Ambassador Kwame Okafor's diplomatic experience enables international collaboration on educational equity initiatives that protect linguistic minorities worldwide. His United Nations advocacy results in resolution recognizing multilingual education as human right, worthy of protection through international law. Tyler Rodriguez wins Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, exposing educational discrimination through digital documentation that holds institutions accountable for systematic bias. His career demonstrates how student voice can create social change through media advocacy that amplifies marginalized experiences. Maya Patel becomes civil rights attorney, specializing in educational discrimination cases using her friendship with Amara as motivation for protecting student dignity against institutional prejudice. Her legal advocacy ensures accountability for educators whose bias violates constitutional protections and professional ethics. Ms. Reyes transforms into national leader in multilingual education, developing curriculum frameworks that celebrate linguistic diversity while maintaining academic rigor. Her professional development programs train educators to recognize code switching as strategic competence, rather than academic deficiency requiring remediation. Principal Morrison's crisis management during the incident earns recognition for institutional accountability that prioritizes student welfare over administrative convenience. Her leadership demonstrates how educational administrators can create inclusive environments through policy enforcement and cultural competence requirements. Alex Chen's student advocacy influences youth leadership programs that train teenagers to recognize and address institutional bias through organized action. His government experience provides template for student voice in educational policy development that protects civil rights and promotes inclusive excellence. Jordan Washington pursues education career inspired by witnessing how courage can challenge injustice, becoming teacher who specializes in recognizing and nurturing diverse forms of intelligence. His classroom practices reflect understanding that academic excellence manifests through multiple cultural and linguistic expressions. Dr. Kim's ESL expertise evolves into international consultation about multilingual student support that transforms deficit models into asset-based approaches, celebrating cognitive advantages of linguistic diversity. His professional development work influences education policy in dozens of countries. The viral footage becomes required viewing in education courses, studying bias, cultural competence, and student advocacy. Universities worldwide use Amara's case study to demonstrate how assumptions about intelligence can mask extraordinary capabilities, while revealing how courage can create accountability. Bradshaw's dismissal becomes precedent for holding educators accountable for discriminatory behavior regardless of tenure or seniority. Her case influences collective bargaining agreements that eliminate protection for bias while maintaining due process rights for professional misconduct investigations. The incident transforms national conversation about educational equity, inspiring legislation that protects multilingual students, while requiring teacher preparation programs to address implicit bias and cultural responsiveness. Educational policy reflects understanding that linguistic diversity strengthens rather than weakens academic environments. International education organizations adopt the Riverside Standards for linguistic inclusion that require schools to celebrate multilingual capabilities while providing appropriate support for students navigating cultural transitions. These standards influence educational practice across 6 continents. Amara's autobiography, 12 Voices, a multilingual journey through educational bias, becomes bestseller that inspires students facing similar discrimination. Her story demonstrates how dignity and intellectual honesty can overcome prejudice while creating positive change that benefits future generations. The Federal Department of Education establishes the Multilingual Excellence Initiative, using Amara's case as founding inspiration for programs that recognize linguistic diversity as national asset requiring cultivation rather than remediation. The initiative influences educational funding priorities and teacher preparation requirements. 10 years later, linguistic discrimination in education decreases by 68% in states implementing the Okafor protocols, while multilingual student achievement increases dramatically when educators receive proper training about cultural competence and bias prevention. The transformation proves that accountability and excellence coexist when institutions prioritize dignity over prejudice. Research studies following Amara's case demonstrate that multilingual students consistently outperform monolingual peers in critical thinking, cultural competence, and creative problem-solving when educational environments celebrate rather than diminish their linguistic capabilities. The findings influence global education policy toward asset-based approaches. Most importantly, the story proves that student courage can create institutional change when truth confronts prejudice through intellectual demonstration that exposes bias masquerading as academic standards. Amara's dignity under attack becomes template for transforming discrimination into opportunity for educational justice that protects future generations from similar treatment. The long-term impact extends beyond individual justice to systematic transformation that recognizes multilingual capabilities as preparation for global citizenship rather than academic obstacle requiring remediation. Educational institutions worldwide implement policies that celebrate linguistic diversity while maintaining academic excellence through inclusive practices that serve all students. The legacy demonstrates how one moment of courage can influence educational policy for decades, proving that justice delayed is not justice denied when students possess strength to challenge authority through truth that exposes prejudice while creating accountability that transforms institutions into inclusive environments worthy of diverse communities they serve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.